So for those in the chat who were asking about captioning, we did plan on having that. It sounds like they're finding a last-minute replacement for us because we're doing it as live captioning, not by a real person, not just automatic captioning. And so we'll get that available as soon as we can. If you are using the chat, we're not going to be able to monitor everything that goes on there. You may want to make sure, if you want to be seen by everyone, to click panelists and attendees as your intended audience. But we'll explain how we'll be having people join in the discussion beyond just the chat. We're up to 300 participants now. We'll be starting very soon.
Ben, people in the chat are asking, is the preferred hashtag WOTY 2020?
Yes.
Okay.
Hashtag WOTY 2020. WOTY 2020 is what we've typically been using. So please feel free to use that on Twitter and elsewhere. We're having some live tweeting going on as well from the American Dialect Society account by Ryan Collister. And the captioner will be here in 15 minutes. So apologies for the delay in that. But we will get started so that we're not too delayed here because we have an awful lot to cover. I'm waiting for the stream of people to slow down a little bit, but the attendee number keeps ticking upwards. There's a question of whether there's a maximum number. We could actually go up to 1,000. We're not going to hit 1,000, but we did have 500 to 600 people register. We'll see how many people actually make it, but we already got a very good turnout.
Ben, is there a link that others can join who got locked out because they didn't register in time? This is a question from Rafaela.
Even if you do that now, you will still get the attendee link as soon as you register. And I can also share that link if you need it, but she shouldn't be locked out. It should still be open.
Hi all, I'm seeing a few questions in the chat about voting and do you need an app and things like that. No, you do not need an app. We'll be doing it all in Zoom, and you are going to get very detailed instructions on how we will handle the usual speaking for and against words and handle all the voting in just a minute.
Yeah, why don't we get started soon? We'll say one more minute. We'll make it 7:10, and then we'll get started for real.
And I'm going to owe my neighbor's cookies after this because my dog has lost her mind and she's just in the backyard and she's their problem now.
Okay, it is now 7:10, so let's get started. As people continue to trickle in, that's fine, because we have got a lot of introductory material to get through. Hi, I'm Ben Zimmer. I'm chair of the New Words Committee of the American Dialect Society. Welcome, everyone, to the American Dialect Society's 2020 Word of the Year selection. This is the first time we're doing this as a virtual event, so please bear with us. If there are any technical difficulties, we've already had a few glitches so far. You can bet there will be a few more. We're so glad to have such a great turnout for this event. In the years I've been overseeing Word of the Year, or WOTY as it's known, lots of people have said they wish they could be there in the room when we have our vote. So it's great that this year everyone can not only see what they've been missing out on, but actively participate in the discussion and the voting. I want to start off with some thanks. First, I would like to thank Julie Roberts, Executive Director of the American Dialect Society, for all that you've done to make this happen. When the ADS decided to cancel its annual meeting, that happened over the summer, we started kicking around ideas about how we could still do the WOTY vote virtually, and here we are, it's happening. If you're interested in joining the American Dialect Society, you can find the information on our website, americandialect.org, and you can also share a link in the chat that has information on membership. That gets you access to the official ADS journal, American Speech. And American Speech comes out quarterly. It's published by Duke University Press. Thanks also to Duke Press for sponsoring this event and setting up the Zoom webinar. Special thanks go to Jocelyn Dawson, Dan Rucha, Jess Malatoris, and Jessica Castor-Rappel from the marketing department of Duke Press. Duke is also providing us with security for the event, just in case, and is also ensuring accessibility by providing real-time captioning. Apologies for the delay, but we will have the captioning up and running soon. And when that happens, there should be a closed caption option in your meeting controls for anyone who needs it. I also want to thank my co-hosts. Charles Carson, managing editor of American Speech, has worked out all the logistics involving Duke's hosting of this webinar and is in charge of the voting process, which you will see soon. I should also mention Charles and I work on a regular feature for the journal American Speech called Among the New Words. This is a long-running feature. American Speech itself goes back to 1925. Among the New Words has been going since 1941, and it will be returning to the pages of the journal in the next issue after a hiatus. And we're very happy to have Kelly Wright of the University of Michigan joining Charles and me as a co-author. Dominique Canning, also of the University of Michigan, has been helping out as well. So thank you so much to Kelly and Dominique. I'd also like to thank Grant Barrett, co-host of the radio show Away with Words, and the ADS Vice President for Communications and Technology. Grant is in charge of the slides that you will be seeing as we go through this, and starting with the first slide you're looking at right now. And finally, I would like to thank Dr. Jesse Greaser of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and author of the forthcoming book, The Black Side of the River. Jesse has graciously agreed to serve as our moderator for the discussion tonight, and we'll be calling on people who want to participate. So there's been a lot of questions about how that's going to work. So after my opening spiel, we're going to start voting for nominees in different categories. So first of all, thank you all for the excellent and thoughtful nominations that you've made via the registration form and by email. We received hundreds and hundreds of nominations, and they were really quite good. And so we received those nominations, and then the New Words Committee and other members of the American Dialect Society, the people you see on your screen as panelists right now, met in a special session in advance of this meeting to go over all of these nominations. And the result is a ballot that has been shared on the ADS website, and we'll also share that link in the chat as well. So you can consult that. And as you'll see, we've got lots of different categories, but we've limited the nominees in each category to 5, except for the overall Word of the Year category, where we've supersized it, and there are 10 nominees in Word of the Year, which in fact I believe is the maximum allowed under the voting system we're using. So in a moment, we will open things up to discussion. If you are an attendee, that's most of you, please use the Q&A feature to indicate that you would like to speak and say what you would like to talk about. If you are a panelist, hello panelists, please use the wave hand feature. And either way, Jessie Greaser will see who would like to speak and will call on as many people as she can, time permitting. But before we get started with that, I wanted to give some background to what we're doing here, since this is the first time that many of you have taken part in Word of the Year. We're actually celebrating the 30th anniversary of the WOTY vote. So back in December 1990, Ellen Metcalf, the longtime executive secretary of the ADS, hatched a plan to select a Word of the Year on the model of Time's Person of the Year, as a way to bring some attention to what the society does and also to have some fun. And Alan is actually here with us tonight, and we're so glad that he can join us. We may have a few others in attendance who were present at the creation, like Dennis Preston of Oklahoma State. So in the early years of WOTY, the ADS met in conjunction with the MLA, which at the time held its annual meeting at the end of December. After WOTY 1995, the ADS switched to meeting in conjunction with the Linguistic Society of America, and many here in attendance are LSA members. The LSA has its meeting in early January, and they'll actually still be meeting virtually this time. But because we were freed from the conference schedule this year, we were able to push the WOTY vote back to December, like in the early days. So it's nice to be able to do this during the calendar year of 2020. This WOTY, though, is bittersweet for me and for many others, since it's the first one we've had since losing Jeffrey Nunberg of UC Berkeley, who passed away in August after a long illness. And before we get started on the WOTY vote, I wanted to take a few minutes to pay tribute to Jeff. So I'm going to try to share my screen. 1 second. Okay, I hope you can all see my screen now. So many of you are no doubt familiar with Jeff from his many appearances on the NPR show Fresh Air with Terry Gross. Terry, by the way, sends her regards to all of you, as does Jeff's long-term producer on the show, Phyllis Meyer. Jeff became Fresh Air's resident linguist back in 1987, and in his contributions over the years, he often made mention of the ADS WOTY vote, in which he actively participated. For many years, he also selected his own personal Word of the Year, and I would like to share a few clips of Jeff's segments that I've taken from the Fresh Air archives. So Jeff devoted some time to talking about the WOTY vote in 2001, and I'll play a clip from that episode where he looked back with a critical eye at some of the ADS selections over the previous decade.
Every year since 1991, the members of the American Dialect Society get together at their annual meeting to vote on the word of the year. Last year's winner was Chad. That wasn't a new word in 2000, of course, but it did have a moment of prominence before it slipped back into obscurity. For that matter, neither of the runners-up looks like having legs either. Despite the success of Harry Potter, Muggle hasn't caught on among many people over 12. And we haven't heard much about dot bombs lately, now that the collapse of the internet bubble has been eclipsed by a more general economic devastation. Actually, most of the previous winners haven't fared too well either. The 1999 winner was Y2K, and the winners in earlier years included Millennium Bug, Information Superhighway, and the exclamation not. Back in 1991, the winner was Mother of All, as in Mother of All Battles. And the Society never even considered a lot of the liveliest innovations of the period, like whack, word, and whatever. Of course, there have been some good calls in there as well. The 1995 word of the year was web. And in 1996, the expression don't go there lost out narrowly to soccer mom. And in 1993, the word voted most likely to succeed was the quotative like, as in I was like, no way. That was a pretty good pick. If like were a stock, you could have made a lot of money buying into it back in 1993. So if I seem to be dwelling on the members' miscalculations, it isn't to disparage their powers of prognostication. They're just trying to have fun, and anyway, they haven't done any worse at picking classics over the years than the members of the Motion Picture Academy have. Millennium Bug may not have been the best choice for Word of the Year in 1997, but it's no worse than Titanic for Best Picture.
So that was Jeff in 2001. Skipping ahead, 5 years later, he was talking about how not just the American Dialect Society picks the word of the year, but by that point, a lot of dictionary publishers were also getting into the act.
The business of naming a word of the year began as a half-whimsical exercise in 1990, when the members of the American Dialect Society decided at their annual meeting to pick the word that best expressed some feature of the prevailing zeitgeist. Within a few years, the press was picking up on the vote as a cute end-of-the-year feature, and dictionary publishers and others began to get into the act with an eye to getting some free publicity. Those are merely the Golden Globes and People's Choice Awards of lexicography. Serious wordinistas will be waiting for the linguistic Oscars when the American Dialect Society makes its selection in January.
I like the serious wordinistas there. Wordinista was something that Stephen Colbert had used on his show at the time. After the 2015 Word of the Year vote, Jeff reflected on the selection of singular they as that year's winner.
Talk about belated recognition. At its meeting in Washington, D.C. on January 7th, the American Dialect Society voted to make the 600-year-old pronoun they their word of the year for 2015. Or more precisely, a particular use of that pronoun that grammarians call the singular they. This is the they that doesn't care whether it's referring to a male or a female, as in, if I get a call, tell them they can call me back, or did somebody leave their books here?
So Jeff went on to explain how the use of they for non-binary gender identities was recognized in the WOTY vote. And he returned to the topic of a singular they in 2019, not long before ADS selected it as word of the decade.
That gender-neutral singular they has history, English grammar, and gender equity on its side, and it's gradually been restored to the written language. Schoolroom crotchets can be hard to let go of, but we've largely leveled the linguistic playing field. At least he no longer takes precedence over she. But that didn't make any provision for the rainbow of non-binary and non-conforming gender identities that have risen into public awareness in recent years. The language still required us to choose between he and she to refer to a specific individual. The singular they initially sounded awkward here. We can say somebody named Sandy was brushing their hair, where the pronoun replaces the nonspecific somebody. That's been standard colloquial English for centuries. But when somebody says just Sandy was brushing their hair, you're brought up short. Your first thought is that they must refer to some group of people whose hair Sandy was brushing. But you can make this work if you tweak your internal grammar, so that the pronoun they can refer to a specific individual. It takes some practice to get the hang of it, but the human language processing capacity is more adaptable than people realize, even for geezers like me.
So he closed his discussion about how geezers like him could adapt to singular they for known people by saying it's not a lot to ask, just a small courtesy and sign of respect. So I mentioned Jeff selected his own word of the year for Fresh Air. He started doing that in 2008 and it became a yearly tradition. In fact, his very last piece for Fresh Air, which was broadcast 1 year ago, was about his choice for 2019, which was disinformation.
As always, call it.
Sorry.
As always, this year's Word of the Year candidates came from all over. There were the viral memes like OK Boomer and Weird Flex but OK, but they won't endure any longer than earlier years' candidates like FOMO and Man Bun. Quid Pro Quo had a moment, but the jury's still out on that one. And a surge in dictionary lookups led Merriam-Webster to pick non-binary they. My choice of disinformation needs some explaining. It isn't a new word, just one of the family of names we give to the malignancies that contaminate the public discourse, along with propaganda, and in particular misinformation and fake news. Each of those last two was chosen as Word of the Year by some dictionary or organization in 2017. But over the last couple of years, disinformation has been on a tear. It's 10 times as common in media headlines as it was 5 years ago, to the point where it's nudged its siblings aside. That rise suggests a basic shift in focus. What troubles us now isn't just the plague of deceptive information on the internet, but the organized campaigns that are spreading the infection. Call it disinformation, or call it computational propaganda, or cyber-enabled information warfare, as some have done. The struggle against it is our new forever war, and our vocabulary is having to catch up with it.
So that was Jeff's very last piece at the end of last year. He wasn't able to continue on Fresh Air after that because of his illness. I think that he might appreciate what just happened when I played the clip of him and he said, okay, boomer. Google thought that I said, okay, Google, and responded and started to define weird flex, but okay for me in the background. So I think Jeff would have appreciated that quite a bit. Now it's talking to me again. Well, I'll always cherish the memories of Jeff at WOTY Votes Past, when he would often vociferously advocate for his choices. In fact, Sophie Nunberg, Jeff's daughter, has joined us, and she's with us, and she was actually telling me how he would recount how sometimes he could win over the room, and he certainly could with his eloquence. And I feel like his spirit is watching over us now. Okay, let's get started. I'll stop sharing my screen so Grant can go back to sharing his screen. As I mentioned, we'll be going category by category, and we'll be presenting the nominees, and we will allow people to speak for or against any of the choices. Again, if you are an attendee and would like to speak, please use the Q&A feature and use that and say what you would like to talk about, what word you want to speak about. If you are a panelist, again, you'll need to use the wave hand feature. And Jesse Greaser will be calling on people and unmuting them. With so many people here, we've got quite a lot now, we're not going to be able to monitor the chat. So again, please use the Q&A if you'd like to contribute. And again, time permitting, we'll hear from people, but we do want to keep things going as quickly as we can. We will be voting in 10 secondary categories before the main Word of the Year vote. The voting is going to happen using Zoom's in-person polling feature. So you will see that as soon as we have a vote after the first category discussion is done. This is much easier to deal with than the in-person voting, where we had to have a whole fleet of vote counters counting people's raised hands. So hopefully that part at least will go more quickly. So if the top vote getter doesn't pass the 50% mark, then we will have a runoff between the top two to decide the winner. So runoffs are all the rage these days. We will be having our own. And given the number of nominees in these categories, we can guarantee lots of runoffs. Okay, and Charles Carson will be in charge of all of those polls that we'll see. Grant, why don't we start off with the political word of the year? If you could share your screen and show people on the screen what our nominees are for political word of the year.
Before we hop in, Ben, let me make one quick note about Q&A. So I've gone ahead and enabled the upvoting portion of Q&A. So if you're able to not just say, I want to speak in favor or speak against a particular nominee, but provide a short version of what you might say. This is not going to be a perfect, this is a dictatorship still, and I'll be looking through to see what the various comments are, but this will give people an opportunity to say, oh yeah, that was kind of what I was going to say as well, and I'll look for ones that many people think are interesting, and also the ones that I definitely want to hear from as well.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Okay, so let's start with the 5 nominations we have for political word of the year. We put abolish and defund together because they were very often used in similar contexts this year in calls for drastic restructuring or reforming of law enforcement in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd at the hands of police. These became very contested terms. Whether they were used hyperbolically or not depends on your point of view on the matter. But they were certainly very high-profile words in politics this year. Okay, next one. If Grant, you could advance. We've got dissent collar. The collar that was worn by RBG when issuing her dissenting opinions, and after she passed away, it was worn by people in her honor. Okay, next. Freedom, not freedom as it's usually spelled, but blending with D-U-M-B, reckless or thoughtless invocation of freedom, for instance, in refusing to wear a mask. Petromasculinity, a new kind of masculinity that was noted as a form of masculinity on display during pro-Trump highway rallies, which involved a lot of gasoline. And then finally, we have the 2 terms red mirage and blue shift, which we heard a lot about on election night and the days thereafter, when the early returns in the presidential election showed a skew towards Republicans before more Democratic-leaning votes were counted because of early vote and so forth. Okay, so we have our nominees for political word of the year. If you would like to speak for or against any of those choices, please, attendees, use the Q&A. Panelists, use the hand raising or hand waving. And we'd love to hear what your thoughts are on these ones. So Jesse, you're muted, but I don't know if
okay,
you're ready.
I have Katie Connor, who would like to speak in favor of abolish, defund. Give me a moment.
Yes, please be patient with us. This is the first time we're trying any of this, so I'm hoping it works.
Katie, you have permission to unmute.
Oh, beautiful. Y'all are doing a wonderful job. I just want to put that out there. Wrangling cats in a whole new way. Yeah, I just wanted to argue for abolish, defund. Well, I think lots of the other nominees in this category are wonderful in their own special way, like Dissent Collar, don't get me wrong. I think abolish and defund, in my opinion, are easily the most impactful and I think have politically had the most clout. The others are kind of cutesy and can mean certain things and kind of get tossed around. But I think like abolish and defund are going to be the ones that not just this year, but in years to come are actually going to have an impact and kind of continue to see this like growth as we continue to figure out together what that means for some people. So I just want to say that I think that those together deserve probably the most out of any of these to be the political word of the year.
Thank
Great,
you, Katie.
Thank you.
Nicole Holiday, I see your hand.
Hey, so I was the one who spoke in favor of abolish defund in the nominations and put them together as a slash because I agree with what Katie just said, but also because I think that they are going to stick around because they're whether or not they're hyperbolic, and I was the one that added possibly hyperbolic. The fact that they are used in this way actually pulls the political discourse in a particular direction and forces the mainstream to sort of respond to what was seen as the progressive left. So I think it represents something sort of more broadly about the way that people are thinking about politics in the United States now, and sort of a way that the tension between the maybe more moderate and more progressive wings of the left are kind of trying to resolve the way to move forward.
Great, thank you.
I've lost my questions. Leslie, I'll ask you to unmute if that's okay while I look through.
Yes, I'd like to speak against Red Mirage Blue Shift as political word of the year because I think it was very short-lived, and in fact, the blue shift really was only in the presidential races, or not in all of the even national races where there was definitely a red shift. So to me, that's too short-lived and not as impactful on the whole year as some of the others. Thank you.
Thank you. A few more comments.
This is good. I want to make a request in the Q&A, which is that one of the things I'm seeing happening in the Q&A, this might be because this is a year in which we're able to invite so many of you who have not had an opportunity to see this live. I've got a couple of my undergrads in this group, and I'm over the moon excited that I get to bring them this time. If you're in the Q&A, what we're looking for the equivalent of is, would you be willing to come to the mic and say whatever it is that you have to say? So if you can make that clear to me in your Q&A and leave the kind of like, I think this is cool because of this, pop that in the chat, but leave your Q&A for, yeah, I really want my mic to be turned on and have a chance to speak up. And that will help me be clearer about what folks want to do. I see a lot of comments for abolish and defund.
Yeah, why don't we get a couple of more comments, and then we can start the voting for the category. So go ahead, Jesse. And
yes, indeed.
Get a couple of more.
Sarah Boxer, would you be willing to be unmuted? And it looks like we have a speak against.
Sarah Boxer, are you able to unmute? If not, we'll need to move on. Oh, there you go.
Okay, can you hear me? Sorry.
That's okay. Maybe we'll move on to another one while Sarah works out her audio issues.
Okay.
Here you go.
Still echoing. Sorry, Sarah. We'll need to move on to someone else if we could. Although that was some great feedback you had going there. Let's try something else.
And let's see.
Like the digital seagulls. I'd never heard that used before. It's a great description of what we just heard.
Let's try one more comment.
All right. I'm going to assume that this is Dr. DiPaolo at Utah.
Yeah.
Hello. It's good to see you.
Marianne.
There.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to shift, not just blue shift, but shift, because I am pretty sure that we're going to continue to do a lot more voting by mail. The state of Utah, for example, always sends out ballots, as do many Western states. And I think it's going to catch on, which means that we're going to be in a position from now until whenever for that kind of mirage effect, that some people will go to the polls and vote in person. They'll be counted in one way. The other votes are going to keep coming in. So we're not going to know for a while. So there's going to have to be some way to refer to how the voting blocks come in different stages throughout the process. I also like defund, but shift, as in blue or red shift, is the one I think that's going to last the longest.
All right, thank you, Marianne. I have Big Words 101 who wants to speak in favor of dissent collar.
Yes. Just because RBG was so significant not just this year, but since she passed away this year, and that collar has become a symbol, I'm for that one. She needs to have something this year.
Okay, great. Why don't we try moving on to the voting? And again, you will probably get a second chance to vote in a runoff of the top two choices. So, Charles, would you like to launch the first poll? There it is. All attendees and panelists should be able to submit their vote. Fingers crossed that this works.
Can you see results?
I'm not seeing any results yet, no.
Okay.
I see the results.
Watch out for the shift and the mirage votes.
Look out, there's a dissent collar shift.
Mm.
Okay, 87% of votes are in.
Okay, for some reason I'm not seeing them. Do I need to do something special in order to see these results, Charles?
I don't know the answer to that. I think I can publish the results after we close.
Oh, I see. Oh, I actually have the opportunity to vote, which I didn't think I would have. Oh,
you're not seeing them because you are not promoted to co-host.
Oh, that would be the problem. Please do that.
I will.
Thank you.
Okay, 88% are in, going once, going twice, and the poll ends. Here are the results.
So I thought we might need a runoff, but apparently not. An overwhelming favorite of 74% of the vote for abolish/defund. Dissent color a distant second. Okay, so we had our first successful vote. This is very exciting. Okay, so we will move on to the next category. And I believe that will be the digital word of the year. So these are words having to do with online culture in various forms.
Ben, may I elevate a question out of the Q&A? For those who are brand new, could you speak to a moment, and of course to our perennial question of what it is we are using as our criteria for these votes?
Sure, absolutely. we are not just looking for brand new words that were coined in the past year, but words that were newly noteworthy in some way, that speak to what we're going through as a society, really, speaking to the zeitgeist. And so, you know, think of that in terms of like what we will think back on 2020 and think about. I think that a lot of the comments that were in the political word of the year really spoke to that. So also, before we go on, I just also wanted to say that some of the nominations you'll see will be sort of, you know, lighthearted, and we know that many people have been going through really, you know, difficult times over the past year, and so none of this is in any way intended to belittle any of that, but you know, look at the more lighthearted choices that you'll be seeing as, you know, a way for us to kind of, you know, hopefully come to grips with what 2020 has offered. Obviously, a lot of that has been negative, but, you know, we look for all sorts of interesting developments that have happened. I hope that answers the question. So why don't we go ahead with the nominees for Digital Word of the Year. So first up, we have a hashtag. The hashtag is Black in the Ivory, which was used to amplify the voices of Black scholars and their experiences of systemic racism within academia. We have doom scrolling, that very 2020 activity of obsessively scanning social media and websites for bad news, a seemingly endless scroll of bad news from 2020. We've got FanCam. FanCam is a bit complicated, but basically when you have in its original meaning, it's a video clip made by a fan of a musical act, especially a K-pop band, usually focusing on one performer. That ended up being used in various ways this year to derail an online conversation or as a form of subversive political protest. And it can also be used as a verb. Someone or something can get fan-cammed. Sus, a clipping of Suspicious, which may have been used before 2020, but certainly had its moment this past year because of the popularity of the game Among Us. And that was typically used within the game to label a player suspected of being an imposter. And TikTok, we've got TikTok here as a kind of a passive verb to be made the target of a campaign mobilizing TikTok users as for political purposes. So some kinship with FanCam, which we saw earlier. Okay. I believe that's all 5 of them. We'll get the Word doc here so you can see all of them at the same time. And let's start the conversation. Anyone want to speak for or against any of these?
I have a problem with TikTok in the past tense because it looks too much like TikTok, which would mean something very different.
Well, we can put an apostrophe there for...
Or we could put a parenthesis C.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I'd like to call on Sophie Numberg.
Hi, hello. So while some of your understandings of Suspicious could be from Among Us, with high schoolers especially, sus is used in a way to sort of mean that someone seems like they might be gay or queer. So they seem sus, he seems sus is coded language for talk, like euphemistically for making a judgment on someone's sexuality. So that's why I think we shouldn't be even considering it, because of that kind of really negative and derogatory use, which seems more like a going backwards in language evolution than forwards.
Thank you, Sophie.
Dominique?
Hello. So first I want to say like very good point about sus. That was my question sort of the other night, but I didn't know what the meaning was. I just knew it was kind of strange. But I also love Among Us, so yeah. I would like to explain fan cam a little bit because there was some conversation in the chat about not having heard of it. And I'm actually the one who nominated it. For anyone who knows me, that is unsurprising. But I nominated it because of its use as a way to sort of block police departments from using various technology to identify protesters during the George Floyd protests. And it was also used a lot to flood very racist hashtags during the same time. So any white supremacist hashtag, they kept having to change their hashtags because K-pop fans and non-K-pop fans who had access to fan cams kept flooding their hashtags with like BTS videos. So that's why they're not new. They're not super well known, but they did play a pretty cool, significant role this year.
Thank you, Dominique. Hashtag word kid, Blake Zimmer. Can we get you to speak on behalf of It Sounds Like Doom Scrolling?
Hi. I'm extremely torn in this category because I did put doom scrolling, but like now I'm kind of questioning it. Like now it's between like doom scrolling or fan cam. Like I'm gonna explain like why I think doom scroll. So for doom scrolling, like I feel like going through social media like was just doom scrolling like all the time. But I only feel like I really heard the word like around election day, during like the time for like election, even though it really applies to like the whole year. But I'd be fine with that winning. With fan cam, yeah, it's used to flood the police with fun. Yeah, but like fan cam was a thing like before 2020. It's just become more like widely known. And for sus is like I feel like was like my main choice before, but like I feel like it's has gone down for me a bit because like I feel like I only really hear it like in terms of Among Us, and like not really outside. While like doom scrolling and fan cam could be like used outside of the game. I only really heard used outside of the game, but for like I advocate for both doom scrolling and fan cam because I can't decide, and I'm done speaking now.
Thank you, Blake. That is my son. In case anyone didn't know, Blake is 14 and is very wired. Let's say, he knows all about these words we're talking about. So we're going to need to wrap up discussion on Digital Word of the Year. I think actually, just in the interest of time, why don't we go ahead and launch the next vote in the polling feature for Digital Word of the Year. Doesn't look like we're going to need a runoff for this one. I was so excited for runoffs, but first two categories are showing no need for that.
And Blake, if you missed the chat while you were speaking in favor, you're going to have to scroll back up. You have some fans.
All right, we have 87%, 88%. All right, that looks like we've given people enough time. Doom scrolling is your overwhelmingly favored choice for Digital Word of the Year, with 81%, 255 people voting for doom scrolling. Everything else, distant also rans. Okay. So we're done with digital word of the year. Let's move on to a special category. Now, in some years, like this one, the folks who show up for the nominating session, the New Words Committee and other interested members of the American Dialect Society, decide that there need to be some special ad hoc categories. We have two special ad hoc categories this year, and the first one of those is Zoom-related word of the year. So much of our lives was mediated by Zoom this year, so unsurprisingly, we had to develop a whole new vocabulary to describe it. So let's see what we have for Zoom of the year, Zoom-related word of the year. All right, okay, now the first one we have is formed in Yiddish, ausgezoomd, fatigued or bored by Zoom. I believe it's a calc or loan translation perhaps of zoomed out, the Yiddish equivalent of that, which some people may find to be more expressive. You're muted. We've already heard that on this Zoom, the weary refrain on Zoom to remind someone to unmute when speaking. Zoom bombing, fortunately we have not had any Zoom bombing in this session. Disruptive intrusion on a Zoom session by online trolls. Zoom fatigue, exhaustion experienced by being overexposed to Zoom, similar to that Yiddish word. And finally, zumping, which is a blend of Zoom and dumping that's breaking up with someone via Zoom. So 5 choices in these Zoom-related word of the year. Feel free to speak for or against any of those choices. I think Taylor Jones was holding forth on Twitter recently about the first one, but I don't think he's actually with us to speak about it. But I see some other people are, so Jesse, take it away.
All right, I first want to recognize Sanja.
Oh no, I didn't have any comments about this. I had comments about the other 2 categories, but I got missed or something. So
okay,
no comment here.
All right. I'm going to call on Melinda Reichelt, who would like to speak for ausgezoomd.
Yeah, I would like to speak for ausgezoomd just because I think it's the most creative one. I love it. That's all.
Thank you much. And John, is your hand raised previously or currently?
Well, it was previously, but it's also currently. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, Zoom bombing is interesting because it seems to terrify everybody who holds a Zoom meeting. But I've never, ever seen any evidence of it happening. People close their meetings early, after 10 minutes, after the beginning. You're always worried about it. And it's, to me, one of these mythical things that doesn't exist in reality, but it's a constant fear. And it's probably the one that I know best of all of these terms. That's all.
Thank you, John. We have a speak against Zoom bombing. Garrett, I'm bringing you on. You are all set.
Mute. So I would, so Zoom bombing was absolutely a thing very early on in the course of the pandemic, when lots of people were using Zoom for the first time, and significantly they were using the free version of Zoom without meeting passwords, without a lot of the other security features that were either only available in enterprise Zoom or just weren't like released in the public product at all. So I think of all of these words, like Zoom bombing seems like it is now the least relevant of all of them, simply because the problem that it refers to, which is basically people typing random numbers into the Zoom join box and joining random meetings, just isn't so much of a thing now that people actually have the ability to more directly moderate their meetings because they're using the paid product.
Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you, Garrett. Katie Connor, I have you for you're muted, except guess what? You're not.
All right, and that is exactly why I'm here to emphatically argue for you're muted. As the person who serially goes off in classes or in meetings, luckily not teaching this semester, and then I'm told 2 minutes in, hey, you're muted, I think this is one that we can universally experience together. I think that this in this category is the great uniter of all of them. I would be shocked if anyone in this meeting has not either experienced secondhand embarrassment or firsthand embarrassment of the you're muted moment. So emphatically for you're muted.
Great, thank you. Okay, we've hit the 10-minute mark, which we're trying to keep to in the discussion. So I think we can go ahead and open up the voting for Zoom-related word of the year. Let's launch that poll. Well, at the very least, the lack of runoff so far means that we're not giving Charles extra work to do the runoff polls. So at least so far, we haven't needed it.
Okay, we're at 90% of votes.
Great. All right. So once again, we have a clear winner. You're Muted wins with 65% of the vote, representing 215 votes in favor. Zoom fatigue, a distant second. You're Muted is your Zoom-related word of the year for 2020. So now we can move on to the second of our special ad hoc 2020 categories that we added to accommodate all of the coronavirus-related words. And of course, there were so many this year, hashtag Corona coinages, that we could only give you a selection of 5 in this category. So let's take a look at what we have. Contact tracing, we heard quite a lot about that, the process of identifying who may have come into contact with a person carrying an infectious disease like coronavirus. We have coronials, kind of playing off of millennials as the coronavirus generation for the predicted baby boom that some think will happen in the wake of the pandemic. Then, of course, just the name of COVID-19 or COVID for short. No one had heard of this a year ago because it hadn't been coined yet, the disease caused by infection from novel coronavirus. And then next, flattening the curve, another phrase we heard a lot, the effort to slow the spread of coronavirus by taking community isolation measures. Moronavirus, however you'd like to pronounce that. Obviously a blend of moron and coronavirus, a disparaging term for foolish behavior or ideas related to the pandemic. And, sorry. Was that the last one? I didn't have it in front of me.
Have the Rona.
Well, the Rona is actually going to be in the slang category. We moved it down to the slang category. Again, there had to be some moving around a bit to even this all out so we could have 5 contenders in each category. So we'll be seeing some other coronavirus-related terms in other categories. But these are the ones we can vote for in this category.
And social distancing was not here.
Yes, we'll have that in the overall category for sure. But these are the 5 we're considering for this category. Again, it was very difficult. You know, there were literally hundreds of corona terms that we could have, you know, things related to coronavirus that we could have selected to fill out this particular category. And again, you'll be seeing some other ones in other categories as well.
There are only 4 listed though.
That's because Grant needs to, yeah, there you go. The old next page on the Word doc problem.
I think if we have contact tracing in this category, we should have social distancing in this category.
You know, I think that is an oversight, even though we'll be seeing it later for sure. Charles, if it's not too much trouble, could you add social distancing to the choices? So we'll have 6 choices for this category. It does feel like one that really does belong here.
While that's being typed, I want to lift a question out of the Q&A, which is, could we explain why COVID is here but is not a candidate for WOTY?
Again, the nominations were made for the overall category that came out of that nominating session from, you know, members who, you know, put those up for overall word of the year. When we get to that category, we can discuss, again, 10 will be our maximum. So that was another consideration. Sometimes words that might have seemed a bit too, you know, similar might not have been considered, but we'll get there when we get to overall word of the year. We can discuss that further. For this category, though, we have a discussion for or against any of these choices.
I'd like to recognize Aisha Malik.
Hi, so I would like to speak against flattening curve and contact tracing because that didn't really happen so well in the United States. And so, you know, we now have a real problem. So to highlight these words as our coronavirus related words of the year would just make me think of, you know, how badly both, you know, individuals and society did in terms of those words. I personally really like coronials because I think it brings a little bit of light-heartedness to, you know, such a serious issue right now. And so I think that, you know, these are great words, but those measures didn't really happen in the United States so well.
Thank you, Aisha. I would like to recognize Laura Wagner from the Q&A.
Hi, I wanted to speak in favor of COVID. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
I'm not muted, right? Sorry, that's the last category. I want to speak in favor of COVID because it's not just the word of the year, but for me, it's the prefix of the year as well. Because things are COVID friendly. I've COVID proofed my home. I've COVID shopped. We've all done many COVID related things, and COVID is actually a productive morpheme at this point. So I'm in favor of it, not just for its word status, but for its morphological status.
Thank you much. And I would like to recognize Alice Freed.
Good. I had decided weeks ago that COVID would be the word of the year and should be the word of the year since, as we say, because COVID. So I was surprised and somewhat disappointed to see a separate category because 2020 was about COVID-19 and the coronavirus. So I don't know how we can make that distinction. So in this particular category, I'm in favor of COVID, but I think it should be the word of the year.
Thank you very much. Gretchen.
Hi, I'd like to speak in favor of social distancing, partly because of sort of general productivity. People talk about, you know, inviting someone to a distanced event. We went on a distanced road trip, or we had distanced drinks in the park. We did a distanced Thanksgiving, and that use of distance has changed as a result of social distancing. So I think that's kind of a particularly interesting reuse of a new word under that, whereas things like flattening the curve and contact tracing haven't led to as much sort of broader lexical change.
Thank you, Gretchen. Emily Bender, if I can have you for Flatten the Curve.
I was promoting Flatten the Curve as word of the year back in March when we were first attempting to flatten the curve here in Seattle. And what I particularly like about it is how it expresses the why of what we're doing with social distancing. That it's not just about each independently keeping ourselves and our friends safe, but also keeping our healthcare system from getting overwhelmed. And I appreciated the phrase for putting the focus there. And so that's why I like it as word of the year, or COVID-related word of the year.
Okay, maybe just one or two more, since we're coming up on the 10-minute mark again.
Thank you, Emily. Bethany Gardner, if I can have you to speak against coronavirus.
Right, yeah. People have pointed out that COVIDiate is more common than coronavirus, but I like to speak against both of them. I'm always here for a good pun, but I think we can do better than validating ableist language. Like if we're going to criticize people, criticize them for selfishness, for recklessness, we can do better than like using ableist language to criticize people. And I think by voting for that, I would like to see the linguistics community maybe not validate that sort of language.
Thanks very much.
Okay,
Pearl?
maybe, yeah, go ahead. Maybe one more.
That's our last.
Yeah.
Hey, so I wanted to also speak in favor of social distancing and also actually make a point about the use of physical distancing instead. So I'm actually the person who wrote the communications plan for the college I work at and made a very strident effort at switching to physical distancing. And I can tell you that social distancing has just, as much as I try to use it in all official statements, everyone I work with on the team to do coronavirus stuff at my college, we've just defaulted to social distancing because it is what everyone hears. It's posted everywhere. It's just, like Gretchen says, it's just really going to be the phrase that people really think about, and it came on really early.
Thank you, Pearl. Okay, so why don't we go ahead?
Wait, I have
I'm sorry.
I don't know if you'd call it procedural, but someone put this in the chat, and I agree, and also find it complicated because we have the title of this as corona-related words, but we have COVID in the category that's describing it. So it seems kind of odd to have that as an option. Like, I'm not sure how we pandemic related.
Sure.
Okay.
And I mean,
all right.
And strictly speaking, although people don't use it strictly, you know, COVID is supposed to refer to the disease, but obviously people have broadened its meaning beyond what the WHO wants us to use it as. So yes, we can call it pandemic related to avoid any duplication there. Okay, so thank you, Sanjo. Let's go ahead and open the voting for this category. Now with 6 choices. We might actually get a runoff this time.
No, I think there's a blue wave.
Well, we'll see. This is such a different experience than sort of me having to do math quickly, counting up, you know, people's numbers from different parts of the room. I can just sit back and watch the numbers go up.
And while the numbers are coming in, there was a question that came in that was answered in text, which is how many people are in attendance, and we've been floating back and forth between about 300 and high 60s to up to about 380 some. So thank you all for being here.
So yeah, we can see the numbers on our end, but I guess attendees only get to see the percentages, not the actual raw number of votes. And we are at 91% voted, so we will close it. This one was a little closer. We have 58% representing 192 votes for social distancing, with COVID coming in at 33% representing 109 votes. So once again, no need for a runoff. Social distancing is our pandemic-related word of the year. Okay, great. We're going to go to the next category now, which is slang and informal words. So we're going to be looking at slang/informal coming up on the screen. Okay, so the first one, this was nominated for this category. It could have been in the previous category. COVIDiot, a person who foolishly ignores COVID-19 protocols. Next up, girls, gays, and theys, an inclusive form of address encompassing female identifying LGBTQ and non-binary identities. I welcome refinements of that definition. It was a tough one to try to gloss. Next, another one we could have considered in the previous category, the Rona, playful term for coronavirus, also personified as Rona with a capital R, Miss Rona, Aunt Rona. Poggers, term used to denote excitement, derived from a Twitch emote showing someone with a surprised expression. And if you have to ask what a Twitch emote is, then poggers may not be quite resonant for you in this case. And then, next up.
Sorry.
WAP. We all knew it was coming from the song of that title by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. Everybody's favorite acronym, well, maybe not favorite, but certainly one that got a lot of attention this year. Acronym for Wet Ass Pussy. WAP is our final choice for slang informal word of the year. Okay, anyone want to speak for or against any of these choices? We already heard one comment speaking against COVIDiot, but perhaps one of the other ones.
Aisha, if I can call on you, and Sam, you're on deck with the exclamation points and lovely snowflake emojis. Sam.
Hi. I would like to argue in favor of WAP because obviously I want Ben to have to explain this to the press. Although, I mean, there's been so many write-ups of it anyway that it's not really that difficult, but it was nice to hear him say the word. And then there's also, I would like to also argue in favor of the Rona. That one, you know, I believe that everybody has used at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Sam, you're all set?
Okay, hi, am I here?
You are indeed.
Okay. Yes, I want to speak in favor of poggers. So this is a very strong category. There's a lot of good stuff here. But I think it's very easy to underestimate poggers and pog as sort of the thing about it is it's incredibly versatile. It can really be used to express almost any positive emotion. And usually words that are this versatile don't become this popular this fast. I really think that this could be a big part of the way that people speak for the next decade, couple decades. It's incredibly, incredibly prevalent among young people. Yeah, and that's my point. That's what I have to say. That's it.
Thank you much. Sandra, if I can recognize you from the panel.
I have my son here to speak against girls,
I don't
gays,
want
and
to speak
theys.
against something specifically. I just wanted to. I'm just curious about what the including it in terms of like what people's thoughts generally are on it. Because I mean I do have my issues with trying to group things in that way terminology wise, but I'm mostly interested in just hearing others' thoughts on it.
Could you tell them what your problem though is with it?
Okay. My main issues around it are basically because it doesn't. It's an idea of it being inclusive, but it doesn't actually end up covering things in a way that I feel like it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you like just starting from the beginning, you can just look at it as like, first of all, not all non-binary people use they them pronouns, and so it kind of creates issues on that. But then beyond that, okay, yeah, sorry, I can lean down here. Hello. Let me grab the chair actually then.
Isaac pulling up a seat, you know.
Well, I mean, I didn't want to just be like awkwardly leaning over my mom's shoulder.
Get that man a chair, a microphone, and a drink.
But I mean, the other, I think, more major point, at least for me, is I feel like this is going to go down basically the same way as you got with spaces designated for, what's it called? Sorry. Women and non-binary people, both in terms of grouping things in that way, because that kind of goes against the idea of like what non-binary is to begin with by grouping it in that aspect. But then you also start to see how those spaces get twisted, basically. And so if you get like, it's hard to discuss because of like how weird it is, but you, it ends up becoming reactive, like reactionarily exclusionary towards some trans and non-binary people due to the way that it ends up working out in reality based on what the term actually should necessarily like say.
And that is why I could not explain this on Tuesday.
Okay. Thank you very much, Isaac.
Oh, no problem.
Oh, and by the way, Isaac, my son came and spoke. So Blake, I'd like to see you on screen speaking.
We'll see if we can arrange that.
All right. In response to Isaac's request, Sunny, if I can have you unmute and speak in favor of girls, gays, and theys.
Hi. Yes.
Hi.
I don't think of it as necessarily trying to be inclusive, but problematizing that notion of like non-binary people are women asterisk or like women light is really annoying, of course. But I see girls, gays, and theys as much more in the vein of the same way, like, you know, someone who's not necessarily gay might say that I'm gay, like, because they're not necessarily monosexual, you know, gay, but like it just means that they have this kind of identity within the community, and any like identity issue is going to be fraught. But I think the excitement around girls, gays, and theys is very much because it's exclusionary of certain people, because it makes people feel safe. The issue of trans men sometimes wanting to be, or sorry, some people wanting trans men to be in that is extra yikesy. But yeah, so that's comments.
Thank you. Nicole?
I'm the person that nominated girls, gays, and theys as an internet citizen, TikTok user, member of the category girls, gays, and theys. Not all terms need to include all people all the time. And we have BIPOC in here somewhere, and I think there's some analogy here too. I appreciate what Sunny said. I personally have never seen it used in a derogatory fashion. And in the chat, when it was first mentioned, a lot of people who identify as a member of that group were saying it would mean a lot to them if it were recognized. It's there to indicate content that is not designed for every single person, because we assume that default content is for cis het white men. So when you say, hey, I'm doing it for the girls, gays, and theys, girls, gays, theys, whatever, people that feel included can feel included, but it doesn't mean that no straight man is allowed to watch your video or enjoy your tweet. I think it is overwhelmingly something that, as Sunny said, actually broadens the category of people that have solidarity together. So that's the way I've seen it as the person that nominated it. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Nicole.
Maybe one more comment, and then we can go to voting.
To switch to a different word, Anna Fletcher to speak on behalf of WOP.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Indeed.
All right, so I'm voting for WOP because I see it as not only just a really fun phrase to say, and I think all the lyrics are just so fun, but I see it, you know, as an important phrase for female empowerment. I mean, in modern rap and hip hop, you know, and throughout all time, really, I mean, you know, women rappers have been celebrating female sexuality
Missy Elliott, Lil Kim, Lauryn Hill. But, you know, male sexuality has saturated the modern rap and hip hop world with little to no criticism. And then WAP comes out and it gets, you know, all this criticism. So I just think that this is really important for more acceptance, normalization, celebration of female empowerment.
Thank you. I think we're going to need to move along. Just we're running behind our schedule, so we're going to open up the voting for slang and informal word of the year. A lot of very interesting choices here. Let's see how it goes.
Hey, simp is on this list, and we didn't discuss simp in
Yes,
this category.
Charles, I think we're going to need to rerun this poll. I think we're going to need to rerun this because that was nominated in this category, and then after some further discussion, especially from Sonja, we decided to replace it with poggers. So, Charles, would you be able to edit this poll and relaunch it with poggers in place of simp?
All right, give me a second.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I have to use the runoff category. Doing this fast, so forgive any typos.
While we do this, Kenzie Clark, would you like to share what you've placed in Q&A? Maybe.
Maybe. Can y'all hear me okay?
Indeed.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so our Ling department did our own word of the year nomination, and someone brought up a really good point about WAP in relation to specifically women of color and sexuality. And what she wrote was, part of its importance is the conversation about censorship, both of what's typically explicit language and of women of color's sexuality. The use of an acronym as the title has allowed people to discuss this song/music video in media/public spaces without really discussing it maybe, or actually having to say the full song title. I think an argument can be made that WAP is a really clever titling. The song can be mentioned to a wide audience without concern of censorship.
Thank you much.
Great, thank you for that. And we have the poll relaunched now. Thank you, Charles, for that. Poggers is there as it should be. So please enter your vote now. This is the vote that counts.
And this is just a short reminder that as we run and continue on into our second hour of our meeting, if you can keep your comments very tight, Twitter length. And that way we'll get to as many people as possible within the range for each category.
Okay, looks like we are actually going to need a runoff. In this case, the Rona and WAP are the two top vote getters, the Rona with 35% representing 107 votes, and WAP with 27%, 82 votes. So now we're going to ask Charles to do some more quick typing in order to create the runoff with those two as our only choices. Okay, let's go right ahead and vote on that.
It's WAP, Ben. You clean it up with a mop.
Right.
just briefly point out that unfortunately, because of the velar characteristics of the W onset in the acronym, the pronunciation makes it parallel to an insulting term for Italians. Of course, it should be WAP, but because you don't say watch for watch, and so because of the phonological environment, we're going to have that unfortunate homophone.
Thank you, Dennis. Okay. I'm not seeing an overall percentage. I'm not seeing an overall percentage in the runoff category, but
59-41, Rona 59, WAP 41.
right. Yeah, I wasn't seeing an overall percentage of the number
Oh,
of
I see.
people who were voting for this as opposed to the other polls.
Oh, I see.
But I think that we can stop the voting now because the Rona is the clear winner, 59% to WAP, not WAP, 41%. Okay, so the Rona is your slang/informal word of the year. All right, we're running behind schedule now, unfortunately, because of some technical difficulties there. So let's move right along to the euphemism of the year. Some interesting euphemisms in this category. We have the word essential as it's applied to workers, labor, and businesses, used for people often underpaid who are actually treated as expendable because they're required to work and thus risk infection from coronavirus. Everything is cake, a meme you may have seen, in which objects turn out to be hyper-realistic cakes. That was extended to talk about trust issues, so it could be used as an expression of extreme distrust. Next, we have freedom seeds, a nickname that was actually used by the National Rifle Association, at least in one tweet, as a term for ammunition, freedom seeds. Humaning. This is apparently a new marketing term that's used for a consumer-oriented approach to somehow be more human. Tubin. To expose oneself on Zoom in the manner of Jeffrey Tubin. I'm sure we're all familiar with what manner that was. So Tubin as a verb. And so these are our nominees for Euphemism of the Year, and I see Mark Peters is ready to go as the euphemism expert. If Jesse, if you want to call on Mark.
Hey, can you hear me? Yes, okay, great.
Here we go.
Thanks. Thank you, Jesse, and Ben. First, I just wanted to say, I don't really understand how everything is cake is a euphemism, so not really in favor of that one. And for essential, the definition here is pretty euphemistic. I just wanted to point out that it's even broader than that. In the state of Florida, World Wrestling Entertainment, the primary professional wrestling organization in the world, was deemed an essential business as well. So you don't really get more euphemistic than that. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. I actually have no one waiting in the wings. So Pearl, if you would like to go ahead and speak.
So I work as a linguist, but not really in academia. I work in the Division of Administration and Finance at a college. I'm actually in an essential business operations area, and I have been going in twice. So I've been seeing essential worker for ages because it's very common in public agencies. And I would definitely vote for it as euphemistic for that fact that I've heard essential workers for years, for today or yesterday, the snow day that we had. And it had always been kind of like the baseline operations of the building, plant, whatever. And now it's just like anything to make it more comfortable for people to stay at home. So I would definitely push essential or essential workers as the word for this category.
Super. Thank you, Pearl. I would like to recognize Julie Sweetland. My computer has suddenly decided to start to be slow.
Hey everyone, this is Julie, and I would like to add something here. I think a euphemism we've all heard quite a lot this year are either police-involved shootings or killings at the hands of police, whereas the true term would be those are euphemisms for murder or extrajudicial executions. And so I would like to for us to consider that one. I also just want to point out something that John Rickford, he had to leave, but he wanted to put it in the chat. He wants to just draw people's attention to his comment in the chat about the potential of calling unwanted racist backlash to the Black Lives Matter movement if we pick defund as the word of the year. So I just want to bring that up to you. Thanks.
Okay, so Julie is suggesting adding either police-involved shooting or killing at the hands of police. As I would say, police-involved shooting is certainly a strong choice if we want to add that as a sixth. And there was a lot of discussion and critique of that term and how it has sort of a term that came out of police department usage going back to the LAPD back in the 70s, I believe, from my own research on it. So I think that police-involved shooting would be a good addition to this category. So Charles, if you could add that. And I think, again, because we're running short on time.
Ben, it's officer-involved shooting.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. That's officer-involved shooting. Thank you. So I'm sorry, if we could add officer-involved shooting, and that is the term that, dates back to LAPD usage in the 70s, officer-involved shooting as euphemism of the year. And Charles, as soon as you add that, let's go ahead and open the vote. Thank you. Okay, we're hitting 90% of the vote, and there's a clear winner in this category as well, essential, with 65% of the vote, representing 209 votes, is the euphemism of the word, euphemism of the year, with officer-involved shooting second place with 30%. Great. All right, so we're going to move on to the next category. This is the emoji of the year category. We took a little break from having emoji as a separate category, but there were enough strong contenders that were nominated this year for us to revive this category as a standalone category. Last year, for instance, it was just emoji were just folded into the digital category. So for emoji this time, we have the two fingers touching, combining two emoji actually, used to indicate shyness, hesitation, or pleading. We've got the face with pleading eyes used for timid begging or beseeching. I saw there was some discussion on Twitter about other uses it could be for as a reaction to cute things, for instance. Obviously, these emoji have a whole range of uses that we can't put entirely into one gloss. Okay, the next one, the rather freaky eye-mouth-eye combination, which is often explained as it is what it is, or used to express amazement, shock, disgust, or confusion. The writing hand emoji, used for bullet-pointed lists of how to fix things. Face with medical mask, indicating mask wearing during the pandemic. Okay, so those are our 5 choices for emoji. Does anyone have brief comments that they would like to make for or against any of these choices?
I would like to recognize Dominique Allen Lowell Bouachith. I'm going to try. I went for it. Who would like to suggest that we perhaps amend one of our entries?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I just want to speak in favor of combining the pleading emoji and the two fingers touching emoji. In my experience with these, those three emoji together are often used as an ensemble in a similar way to as how eye, lip, eye are used together. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra.
Yeah, I still want to add the care emoji / sticker or whatever it is, which I think got used a lot. I know it's on Facebook, but I know you can copy and paste stuff. But that particular one was very useful this year in particular, which is why I think they added it, because so many of our friends and family members were dying or sick, and it was a way to connect with people who were experiencing these various things, to indicate that, you know, we're all in this together. We feel for you, and our prayers are with you, without having. But that emoji in particular, I think, was just very useful in this year.
So Sandra was talking about an emoji, which is a reaction on Facebook, which technically is not, at least not yet, part of Unicode. Which had been left off, even though it did come up in the nominating session, which we could conceive of. There it is. We could definitely add this as another choice, but even though Unicode doesn't recognize it yet. Of course, I'd love to hear what Gretchen McCulloch has to say on this.
Talk to the care emoji. I think one of the challenges of the Unicode emoji approval process is that there's a difficult for people to show that they would actually use a particular emoji without it already being added to the emoji set. So the care emoji is one of these really interesting examples where people show that there's a use case for it and potentially make a case to add it to the Unicode emoji set in the future. Obviously, I have no power to accomplish this, but this could be a way of making that case if people think it is actually that useful.
Don't message Gretchen about Unicode straight up. She gets too much. Julius Boxer Cooper.
Hi. Yeah, so I'd like to speak in favor of the two fingers touching emoji. I think it's a really neat emoji. I've never actually I haven't seen it that frequently, but it does seem like one of those combo emojis. Like I often use fist explosion fist if I want to do a fist bump, sort of like that. Actually, someone could nominate that if they wanted to, but I think it displays that kind of you know, that hesitation very nicely. And I like to speak against eye, mouth, eye. I mean, it just, I understand what it's trying to say, but it just terrifies me. Like it scares the fluff out of me. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So in terms of the previous comment about the face with splitting eyes often being combined with two fingers touching, I think that's very true. But in discussion that we had about these emoji, they also get used independently, and I think especially the face with splitting eyes kind of stands on its own very often without it. And in fact, someone mentioned on Twitter that emoji was named Japanese Word of the Year, apparently. So I would say we'll keep face with splitting eyes as a separate nominee. Two fingers touching. Feel free to vote on that. As it's used on its own or in conjunction with face with bleeding eyes. So let's keep those nominees the same. But Charles, if you could add the Facebook care reaction as a sixth choice, then we can go ahead with the voting. So whenever
Charles, while you're doing that,
I just wanted to say one thing. I wanted to speak against the writing hand. That's not new. It's been used since dingbats were invented in France in the 15th century in printing, so to do list. So
wow, 15th century, that's quite a pedigree for an emoji.
I want to recognize Diana Davidson because this is the first time that I might actually have the opportunity to fully clear out the Q&A queue. And so I'm going to do it. I'm taking power here.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to speak for the two fingers touching because I haven't seen it just used on Twitter. It's also been used on TikTok as like a visual way of imitating the emoji. So that's another way that that has manifested. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, the queue is cleared, so let's go ahead. Charles, if you've got the 6 there, hugging heart, specific to Facebook. The rest are Unicode.
The polling feature did not like the emoji themselves.
Yes. Sorry that we can't accommodate the actual emoji in there, but you can see it all on your screen. Well, it looks like we're going to need a runoff here. Okay, so we will definitely need a runoff because the top 2 choices, neither of which got 50%, are Face with Medical Mask with 36% and Hugging Heart from Facebook with 27%. So Charles can set up a runoff for those 2 finalists. Okay, please enter your vote for one of these 2 choices.
Please stay tuned on Twitter later this week to find out what my neighbors do to me for my dog barking for 2 hours.
Oh, poor Jesse.
All right, the votes are coming in, but looks like we can go ahead and declare Face with Medical Mask as the winner in this category with 60% of the vote, 184 votes. Hugging Heart with 40%, 123 votes. Face with Medical Mask is your emoji of the year for 2020. Okay, we're going to move right along to the next category. We have very often had a most creative category as a kind of a superlative. This year, the ones that...
I apologize for
combing. Okay,
combing form, yes.
So in this case, the choices are all, interestingly enough, combining forms or combing forms, if you want to call them that. So these are things that play well with others, that, words or word parts that generate new words by being combined. So we have corona from coronavirus, of course, in so many different combinations and blends. Coronasomnia, corona babies, corona cut, that's bad haircut that people were giving their loved ones at the beginning of the pandemic, Coronication for vacation, and Corona Bros, all example of the productive Corona prefix or combining form, or libfix, as Arnold Zwicky might call it. Then we have fatigue showing up in so many different ways: COVID fatigue, lockdown fatigue, pandemic fatigue, Zoom fatigue. I'm sure you all have your own particular kind of fatigue that you can create your own compound form out of. We have mask as a newly productive form. So we have blends like maskne, which is a blend of mask and acne for acne caused by mask wearing. Another nice blend of mask hole and mask break as a compound form, which kids in school apparently are having mask breaks if they're actually in-person learning. Quarren as a combining form, of course, from quarantine, started showing up early on in the pandemic in quarantini, quarantine, quarren beard, like the one I'm sporting right now, quarantigue, combining quarantine with fatigue. And finally, our old friend Zoom as a combining form: Zoom bombing, Zoom mom, Zoom party, Zoom school. Again, pretty much any aspect of your life can now be prefixed with Zoom, since so much of what we do is through this medium now. Okay, so those are the 5 that we have in contention for most creative. Again, it just so happens these creative options are actually creating new words as combining forms.
I would like to recognize Elizabeth Miller, who would like to make a nomination from the floor.
Hi, I just wanted to see if we could add COVID also as a combining form to this. It came up in the earlier category, with my favorite example being COVID baking. Seems to fit the category.
Sure, and it looked like Amy West was also making the same argument in the Q&A. And given our previous discussion, I think that would be perfectly fine to add as a 6th choice. Charles, if you want to get COVID in there as an additional choice for a combining form.
Don't forget COVIDiot.
That's right. So there's a couple of comments I see from May Helena Plum and Satya Johnson in the Q&A. I'll just address the question of should we combine COVID and Corona? I think that there's a case for keeping them distinct because, again, if you look at the types of things that Corona is attaching itself to, they're not really like interchangeable necessarily. Sometimes they may be, but the new forms that we see starting with Corona seem to differ enough from COVID that we could treat them separately. And if there are any strong feelings for or against that, maybe we can go ahead with voting since we're...
I'm sorry, was that a go ahead? Or
yes, I think we can go ahead and vote on this one. Looks like we'll be needing another runoff. Okay, so it looks like from the results that have come in, we'll need a runoff again for the top 2 vote getters. In this case, we have Corin as the top vote getter with 38% and Corona at 17%. So we're going to have Corin from quarantine and Corona from coronavirus as the 2 nominees in the runoff. Okay, please make your choice for either Corin or Corona in your creative combining form category. Okay, we have a clear winner again here with Quarren as the most creative combining form with 69%, 211 votes, versus Corona with 31% or 96 votes. So Quarren is the most creative combining form for 2020. Now that we've finished that category, we're moving into the heavy hitters. We've got most useful coming up, followed by most likely to succeed, and then the overall word of the year. So 3 anticipated categories here. We're gonna look at the most useful choices right now, and we'll just get it from the Word doc this time, I guess. So
yeah, just to speed it up.
Yeah, that's fine. So we've got, as you can see, before times, the time before the beginning of the pandemic, and a kind of a dystopian view of the before times. Blur's Day, a humorous indication of difficulty in determining what day of the week it is. Bubble or pod, we're bubbling these 2 together because they're both used for the group with which one remains in quarantine. PPE as the omnipresent abbreviation for personal protective equipment. And finally, super spreader as a patient or event responsible for spreading infection to many people. Okay, so please chime in if you have any thoughts on any of these in the most useful category.
Jessie is muted, but I think she was calling on me.
I was indeed. Well met.
Thank you. So I wanted to speak on behalf of Bubble or Pod, just having had the personal experience at the beginning of the pandemic of trying to describe to my parents what I was doing with some friends and not yet having these words. And as soon as the words came into our common vocabulary, I was so happy to have a word for something that I had previously tried to describe and didn't have a word for. So I have found these words very useful.
Thank you very much. Katie Connor.
Yeah, I would like to argue for Blur's Day. I think not only is it useful in the current context of COVID, but I find as somebody who has been a student in college for over a decade straight now, the magical time of year during summer or breaks when I don't have classes ruling my life and me being like, is it Wednesday? Is it Friday? Who knows? And I am glad to finally have a word for that besides just, I have no idea what day it is. So I think that's going to continue to be really useful, not just now, but in the after times, shall we say.
Thank you, Katie. And Levi?
Hi, yeah, I just want to speak in favor of before times. I love this word or phrase. I've been using it, all of these now times. And what I really like about it is it just captures, it's been such a marked difference from the before times until these, quarantines now. So I really like how it sort of highlights that difference. And so that's why I really enjoy and vote for this word.
Thanks very much. Sandra, turning to you.
Blur's Day, hands down for me, because I don't know that I know what any day of the week is anymore, but I'm always hoping that it's the weekend. So the Blur's Day has definitely, I swear every Monday I go, is it Friday? Because it feels like Friday. Shouldn't it be Friday? So yeah, Blur's Day has been a great use for me in this. And it's interesting because someone spoke about what it was like as a student. I can say that someone who is now is not necessarily now, but is middle-aged, in general, just forgetting. So my husband, who's older than me, this is a constant thing with him as well. So I think there's an age bias here, maybe, for why I also like it.
Thank you, Sandra. I have a nice for and against pair. Jay Holan.
Hi. I forgot what I was saying. I was looking for it on the chat.
Super spreader.
Yes, super spreader. I didn't hear that before this year, anything about it. And but it's so much about the course of events this year. And it's a very big, scary, important thing. And it's easy to understand.
Thank you much. And Todd Snyder, potentially with a rebuttal.
Indeed, yes. So super spreader, I know, has been used for at least a decade. I'm no historian, but I know it predates COVID significantly. And I wanted to speak against PPE for quite the same reason. As someone who knows a lot of engineers and doctors and some scientists who work in labs, PPE has been in use well before it was COVID was on anyone's radar.
Thank you, Todd. Dominique?
Unmute my, okay. Yeah, my Zoom is running really slowly. But I apparently feel a lot more strongly for before times than I thought I did. I was just going to be quiet. But I think what was really interesting to see was like how quickly it caught on after the pandemic started, or like lockdowns started in the US. So like I was watching, like I had used it myself and then some of my friends were using it. And then I watched a YouTuber that I watch all the time. And this was like maybe beginning of April. And she was also using before times, just like without pause. So it seemed to just like catch on really fast. But I also like it because you could say like the before times, people know what you're talking about. You can say the during times or the corona times, but also like the after times. So like you have all these blocks of time that are like pretty clearly delineated.
Thank you, Dominique. May Helena Plum?
Hi there. Yeah, I believe I was going to speak for before times because I have found it to be such an incredibly useful word for talking about my own life when I say to people things like, I like social dancing, you know, like in the before times, not right now, because right now it is dangerous. So I found it to be the word that I use by far the most frequently of any of these. It just, my day-to-day conversation, like showing that I'm a responsible person.
Thank you much. There's a request in the Q&A to potentially add after times to before times as one entry. And I think the folks who've spoken have seemed to address that.
That's fine. They do go together. And we are just hitting 9 o'clock Eastern. So I think we will try to go right ahead and do the voting for this category, most useful word of 2020.
So I didn't add after, but consider it there.
Yes, it is notionally there. Oh, we have a tight three-way race developing here.
I feel like after times we can vote on in 2021.
We're like, not useful. These were not what we expected.
It's a bit premature to have after thing.
Yeah, we're not sure there will be after times.
Please be after times.
So this looks to be one of the closest ones we've had. Very close for second place here. But we have before times with 36%, 114 votes. And for second place, just edging out bubble/pod is Blur's Day with 25% and 79 votes.
Ben, maybe we should do all the top three then.
I don't want to have to do a second runoff. Let's stick with the top two just because.
All right.
That's the whole point of runoff, isn't it? To get 50%. So yes, let's set up the runoff with before times and Thursday, please.
As I mentioned at the beginning of this call, it is a benevolent dictatorship that we have going on here.
My apologies to all the fans of Bubble.
I sat in that chair once. I was the ruler with no equal at one time. Before after times sounds like a chain restaurant, you know, a themed chain restaurant.
Medieval times.
Yeah, the pandemic burger coming your way at before times.
It'll be
now
in
at your
Pigeon
local
Forge,
mall,
folks. I promise you.
I'm just pulling from the chat. We have on Ben.
Say that again, please.
Couldn't quite hear you.
I'm just pointing out from the chat that we have the pun bent, which is from Sorry, I didn't get your surname.
Oh, benevolent.
Benevolent, okay. And Ben Bass, fellow Ben Bass is quick with the puns in the chat.
Man, I didn't even see that one.
We have a winner here for the most useful category before/after time, 61%, 189 votes. Beating out Blur's Day, 39%, 120 votes. Before/after times is your most useful word of 2020. Moving on to most likely to succeed. The last category before the main one. Most likely to succeed. So again, we're going to be discussing, we already have 6 here, as opposed to our usual 5. The 6 that we have in this category: anti-racism, the practice of actively working to prevent or combat racism. BIPOC as an acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. There may be some different expansions of that. That's the most typical one. Contactless, requiring no physical contact to avoid transmitting disease. Curbside, the pickup of goods without entering a store or restaurant. Gigafire, a wildfire that burns at least 1 million acres of land, and there was indeed such a fire this year in California. Zoomer, a term for Generation Z, highlighting their use of Zoom for remote learning and other activities. I think some people were talking about this on Twitter as well. We do recognize that Zoomer was used before this year. In fact, it was a previous nominee for Zoomer 2 years ago when we had OK Boomer. Sorry, was that 1 year ago or 2 years ago? That was, yes, right.
It's
Last
Blur's
year.
Day. It's okay.
It's Blur's Day. Who knows anymore? So Zoomer used to be just a play on Boomer or Baby Boomer, but now it takes on a whole new significance for that Generation Z living so much of their lives on Zoom. Okay, so here we have 6 choices for most likely to succeed. Thoughts on this, for or against?
I was going to preemptively call on Sanja, but then she raised her hand too.
Okay, so I have 2 words to talk about. One, BIPOC. I don't use BIPOC in the way that it's listed here, although I know that some people do. For me, it's just Black and Indigenous people of color. And as I said the other night, the reason I use that is because the histories of both Black and Indigenous people in this country is unique. They're both unique, I guess, but they're very closely aligned in terms of its connection to systemic racism, et cetera, in this country that is unlike any other particular group. So that's why I don't use it in the way that it's listed here, although at least in the way that the acronym is described here. For me, it's just Black and Indigenous, just those 2 groups, and not all people of color. But also because of that, this term has been used quite often. As a matter of fact, because of the uniqueness of the groups that we're talking about, this term gets used a lot not in addition to necessarily other people of color, but to focus these particular groups. And then on anti-racism is everywhere this year. So I'd like anti-racism to succeed. Unfortunately, I sort of feel like while anti-racism is sort of the term of the moment and the current not to be sustainable sort of anti-white supremacy, calling out white supremacy sort of thing, anti-racism is the thing. Like I've been in these meetings this week, and that is the term, right? All of these videos that you see, all of these books. Okay. What are the books that everybody should read so they can be anti-racist? And the idea of anti-racism being an action, that this is something that you do, as opposed to this sort of static thing. So I think both of these terms have been very much in use this year and warrant this. I think they will succeed, but like I said, I have this lurking suspicion that anti-racism is the new popular thing that institutions say they should be doing, but next year we'll have forgotten about.
Thank you, Sasha. A real quick piece I want to lift out of the Q&A, which is there was a question about anti-racism versus systemic racism, and would somebody on the nominating committee, the New Words Committee, like to speak to that choice?
Well, I can tell you the difference between them. Anti-racism, like I said, is an action. So anti-racism, there's a really good video, by the way, on this very thing, which says, replace the C with a P. So, do you say that you're a non-rapist, right? Which requires no action of you. You're not raping anyone. But if you're anti-rapist, right, then you are actually doing something about it. So anti-racism is doing something about something. Systemic racism is explaining the fact that we have racism that exists within a system, but it doesn't say that we do anything about it.
Thank you, Sandra. And I would like to recognize Masha Lafer.
Hi, I want to speak on Zoomer, and I also want to speak about the, so I think with contactless and curbside, they're both specifically corona-related words that I think are less likely to succeed for that reason. They're very particular to this moment. I thought what Sonia said was very compelling, and I think that as there's been like some confusion clearly about BIPOC, and I think that it's for that reason it's likely to, it's kind of already sort of tried to replace the more generic just POC. and I think that we might see similar trends. And as Sonia said, that the way that corporations appropriate words like anti-racism make them less likely to stay in the limelight. Zoomer, on the other hand, Zoomers are coming into the sort of more prominent political position. I think that Zoomers as a group of people will be increasingly visible, and hence the word. I also think that it's really interesting as a process of word formation, and I think that that makes it compelling because not only is it a parallel to boomer, it's also sort of incorporates the fact that so much of our education is on Zoom. And I think for that reason that it has a staying power that will only keep growing, and because of its, it points out really interesting aspects in slang development, I think that it's very likely to succeed and deserves recognition.
Thank you much. Dave Wilton, if I could recognize you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just quick. As was said before, I think contactless and curbside are going to go disappear in the after times. So I don't think they're going to be very likely to succeed. But I'd like to put in a plug for Gigafire, because I think that is unfortunately going to succeed. We haven't had any climate change related words so far. And I think we're going to see more and more Gigafires as we go on. And while that's kind of horrible and terrifying, I think that's what this category is. So thanks.
Thanks very much. Aisha, if I can recognize you.
You're muted. Aisha, unmute. There you go.
I knew I would do it. So I would like to speak in favor of contactless and Gigafire. With regard to contactless being one of those words that I don't think, people are saying that it won't be used in the after times, I actually think that that's false. There are a lot of people like me who want that to continue, and I think corporations have taken note of people preferring contactless delivery often. And so I think that will actually survive COVID. Curbside and contactless, that people like to not have contact with, some of their drivers or things like that, just because, you don't know the people driving these cars sometimes. So it's nice to not have to interact with them. And just they drop off the food and there's nothing else. And then with respect to Gigafire, as said before, I do believe that one is actually going to succeed in terms of we had multiple fires this year, not only California, but in Australia as well. And so obviously climate change is a very pressing issue. And I think that deserves attention as well.
Thank you, Aisha. Potentially two last comments. One from Julius Boxer Cooper, if you will unmute.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So, I was gonna just say, I think with, initially I was gonna speak in favor of anti-racism, and I think I still will a little bit, but, I think one of the unfortunate aspects of the civil rights movement for people of color in its present state is that I feel like it comes up once every few years once an innocent black or brown person is shot by police, but then people seem to forget about it kind of quickly, which is really unfortunate to me anyway. But I do think the term anti-racism will remain. I think that'll stick around. I think Gigafire might come more into vogue. I haven't heard it a lot. The only one of these I really take issue is BIPOC, and the reason for that is because it's I feel like it sort of creates a notion of otherness by combining black people with indigenous people with people of color. I feel like it's just creating an identifier for people who are not white. I feel like there should be a more detailed descriptor in order to really do every group justice. I think that's just my opinion. But yeah.
Okay, I think we can get one more comment in before we vote.
All right, I'm going to recognize Robin Melnick.
Hello, can you hear me?
Indeed.
I was muted. I would speak about Gigafire. I'm not sure if I'm speaking for it or against it, because it's either maddening or fascinating. It's either if I'm going to be prescriptivist about about word roots. It's maddening, and maybe it's fascinating as semantic drift, because the National Fire Service has actually made these official terms that mega fire is a fire of 100,000 acres or more, and gigafire is 1,000,000 acres or more. And all the scientists are rolling over saying, wait, mega is 1,000,000, giga is 1,000,000,000, so it's whack. So take it as you will.
Giga is 300 if you're from Ohio and go to Cedar Point.
Local knowledge there. Okay, let's go ahead and open the voting for this one. Most likely to succeed. We've got 6 choices here. Okay. Looks like anti-racism is not going to get over the 50% mark. It's stuck at 44%. And in the close race for second place, contactless with 17% it qualifies for the runoff. So anti-racism and contactless will be the choices in the runoff for most likely to succeed. Please enter your choices for anti-racism or contactless. Okay, well, we hit 300 plus votes now. We have anti-racism as the most likely to succeed with 71%, 219 votes. Contactless, 29%, 88 votes. Okay, we are moving right along to the overall category. Word of the year. For overall word of the year, we have 10 choices here. These are all ones that came up frequently in the nominations that came in, and as well as in the nominating session. I did mention before that we sort of capped it at 10 because of the voting with the Zoom polling feature, giving you 10 options. So we have 10 here. So that means that if you're going to make a case for something that really should belong here, we heard some comments earlier about whether COVID should be on it. You're going to need to also make a case for what we should take out. So if you think, for instance, that 2020 doesn't need to be there, then we can swap it with something that you think is a worthier choice among our 10. But we're not going to go over 10 in the number of choices we have. So please chime in on any of these choices.
Okay. Greg Ward, I saw you first.
Oh, great. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'd like to speak in favor of doom scrolling. It and 2020 are the only two that really capture the sense of the entire year without being crisis specific. So the two big crises of the year are, of course, the pandemic and the Trump election chaos nightmare. So those two terms both capture, but I prefer doom scrolling to 2020 because it's more specific.
Thank you.
There's some talk in the chat, and I think it's good that given the previous discussion we had about COVIDiot, let's just go ahead and replace COVIDiot with COVID, and that will solve our problem.
Can it be COVID/coronavirus or corona?
Well, we treated them separately before. Can you make a case for why we should consider them together?
Just because I think people use them interchangeably when referring to the virus. Some people say COVID-19, some people will say the Rona too, but we'll say coronavirus, but they're referring to essentially the same thing. It's just which word do they tend to use more. I tend to just use COVID-19, but I know other people use Corona.
I have suspicions that it's age graded and I need to investigate further. But I support that that suggestion.
I mean, everything on this list, with the exception of BIPOC and anti-racism, are because COVID. So to me, you can take off most of the words on here, because ultimately, if I can't see how anything beyond coronavirus or COVID-19 that has dominated and spawned all of these other things. Although I did like the explanation about 2020 with the two problem things.
I would like to recognize Emily Bender, who has an in-fixing argument for 2020.
Yes, I like 2020 because we can say abso 2020-lutely, and that just shows how 2020 has become an expletive in and of itself, because everyone feels so much so about this year.
Thank you, Emily. Gretchen, can I see you next?
Yes, I'd like to speak against 2020 because we've seen the year as summarization of what's happened ever 2016, and 2016 was nominated. I think 2017 and 2018, 2019 also had their partisans. Like, a lot of years these days just suck. Even more terrible things this year. I don't want to kind of hubristically nominate 2020 as the old bad year, and future years may not also be bad. And I also think that it's more specific about what in the specific year is going on when people look back. We've been doing the year as year.
Oh, Gretchen, we lost you a little bit there at the end, but I think we got the gist.
Yeah.
A lifting from the chat that I meant to lift earlier from the Q&A is a request from Stephen Mann to include physical distancing as part of social distancing, which I believe we did in the previous part.
I don't think we did, actually, and I would argue against it just because although it's been often said that what we're really practicing is physical distancing, if we're wearing our descriptivist hats here, social distancing is what people say, even if they mean physical distancing. Overwhelmingly usage prefers social distancing, even if people might feel that physical distancing is a more precise term to use.
Okay. Trisha Irwin, can we turn to you?
Yeah, I'd like to sort of support what Gregory was saying about doom scrolling. I think because it sort of covers all the different tragedies that have been happening this this year. All the police involved shootings. Is that what it was? That what the was? But also, and the pandemic and the gigafires. So it kind of covers everything, and it sort of names what one engages in. So it's a little bit more creative than, say, 2020. Although you can't say doom fucking scrolling. So that's something to talk about.
Just did. Okay.
All right. Mark Peters, I saw your hand.
Yes, I kind of wanted to reiterate, I forget who said it earlier, but I want to argue against all the COVID words, because to me, I feel like the defining feature of this year is that it's like at least 3 horror movies happening at the same time, maybe up to 6 or 7. So I feel like 2020, and perhaps it's optimistic because, as Gretchen said, maybe future years are going to be just as bad, but I'm kind of hoping this is the bottom. I feel like 2020 perhaps is the new number of the beast and the only word that truly covers this year. However, also, doom scrolling perfectly captures how most of us experienced the whole year. So I think for me, those are the two best candidates. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'd like to recognize Masha.
I first of all, I really agree with what Mark said about words about Corona. It's not. I think that this year is like it's just so much, and I think that doom scrolling is unique in the sense that it really captures like how much things have changed, especially with relationship to like how we perceive media. Before you could use the sort of your news feed as like a way to stay informed, and now it seems like that's such a burden. And additionally, it also shows like how atomized and how helpless so many people have felt this year. It really underscores that like the thing for you to do this year was to stay home and do nothing, and the fact that you were supposed to like stand back was very difficult for many people, and that's something that's very uniquely 2020.
Thank you. Leslie.
Yes, I'd like to argue against pandemic because that's been around a long time and used for other pandemics like the SARS pandemic. Obama had a pandemic task force. I don't think it's unique to this year. And while, yes, there is a COVID-19 pandemic, the word pandemic itself is not, I think, worthy of Word of the Year.
Jason Merchant, if you would like to unmute.
Thanks. I think COVID has a good claim for denoting something that has affected literally every person on the planet, and is very impactful. It's pervasive as a word, and it's also present in all sorts of dialects of English. It's both first and second language speakers. So it's a word that I think deserves being Word of the Year, because it will be recognized by English speakers, first and second language English speakers, instantaneously around the entire planet.
Thank you, Jason. Aisha? You're still muted.
I do that all the time. Okay, so I would like to argue against doom scrolling. I think that post-election, people's doom scrolling quelled a little bit, and so I mean the year was kind of defined by it. But I also don't like the idea of having that as the word of the year. What the chat is really arguing for right now is adding in unprecedented. I think unprecedented actually describes the year a lot better than doom scrolling does, because this was something that, we didn't think that we'd all be locked up in our homes all the time. So certainly I think unprecedented is the word that we should go with.
Thank you.
I think that's why I'd like to speak up for 2020 also. Doom scrolling is a specific kind of activity, and although it could apply to a number of things, we're not assessing how terrible 2020 was. We're discussing the word of the year, which is very, very common use. We're seeing 2020 now enter into all kinds of grammatical constructions and reference to 2020 that's very, very frequent. So linguistically, I think there's, just in terms of frequency, there's a very good argument for it. And I agree especially with those who say that political matters and other matters are covered by this in a way that COVID and some other words, which certainly are good choices, don't do. But 2020 sums up an awful lot of it. And so what if we had some previous bad years, and there may be bad years ahead. But this is a hell of a bad one. And I'm all behind 2020.
Thank you, Dennis. Can I recognize Todd Snyder, who has a comment following on Aisha's?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so actually I think the after the Biden announcement to go to respond specifically to Aisha's comment was what made me think doom scrolling was the best candidate, because I saw people asking what's the opposite of doom scrolling and is joy scrolling a thing, and people were, even when feeling the opposite, seeming to use doom scrolling as the sort of base of comparison, which makes me think it's all the more so sort of representative of Word of the Year. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. Sandra, if I can recognize you.
Yeah, I'm still struggling with thinking about 2020 as a thing, in part because we're not at the end, and I don't see that 2021 is going to. I mean, I know we have the vaccine rolling out, but especially with Christmas coming up and then New Year's, I just, we're in this for another 6 months at the very least, if not into the fall. So I don't know that 2021 is going to be any better than 2020 at this point. But I guess for me, and just thinking about this year, we started, for the most part, we started in March, but we knew what was headed our way before then. And this has just been the year of COVID. And all of these things are connected to COVID. Like I said, I usually use COVID-19 or coronavirus or the Rona, whatever it is that's referring to this virus that has changed our lives, which is why we have Zoomers now. And one of the reasons I even like Zoomers is because the effects of this pandemic will not end with this year or with the end of, with getting a vaccine. The implications for this for people is long lasting. We don't know how long, but if we're talking about educational institutions, this is going to be at least a 5-year process that we're talking about. If we're talking about people's health, we have people who have gotten over COVID, but are still having these long-term effects of it. The impact that it's had upon the economy, the impact that it's had upon schools, right? That we just heard that we have these kids who are a large majority of kids who are failing in school and teachers don't know what to do. So all of this goes back to COVID. This goes back to this virus. It's politically connected in the way that some people have said, right? But it still captures everything that you're talking about for saying what 2020 is, because it has not just the fact that it's the virus that's affected us, but it's the handling of the virus that's affected us as well. And as another person had said, this isn't even specific to the US. This is a worldwide thing that's going on. Anybody can recognize if you have COVID as word of the year, this is a because COVID event.
Okay. I would like to recognize Hannah Eggleston to speak on behalf of doom scrolling.
Yes, hi. Can y'all hear me?
Indeed.
Hi. So my first point for doom scrolling is just like its significant prominence that has kind of emerged this year. And my second point for doom scrolling is, I guess you could say it's versatility. I think you could use doom scrolling in a lot of different settings. There's, political doom scrolling where you're expecting to see something terrible about politics, or you could have like environmental doom scrolling where you expect to see another gigafire. But I think you could also have, especially in these now times, I think you could also have like personal doom scrolling, especially because there is so much bad news even on a personal level because of everything else that's happening. Like scrolling through Facebook. You never know what you're going to see scrolling through Facebook, trying to check up on friends, whether it's going to be good news or bad news. And speaking as a student, I think, through my own personal experience and that of my peers, I think you could also have, like academic doom scrolling in terms of assignments, professors loading on assignments for online class, or doom scrolling like to see your grades or something like that. So I think doom scrolling, is a good candidate just because of its versatility.
Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. I've lost track of who on the panel has raised hands in what order. Betty Berner, you're in my upper left hand. And you are still muted.
Okay.
There you go.
It finally unmuted me. Hooray. I wanted to say that based on what I'm seeing in the chat, I'd like to propose that we replace Blur's Day, which has had nobody speak in its favor, with unprecedented, which quite a few people in the chat are in favor of. And I kind of like, because it certainly alludes to COVID without being COVID specific. So I'm proposing we replace Blur's Day with unprecedented.
Thank you, Betty. If I can recognize Chloe Brotherton, who has a second idea of what we might swap for unprecedented.
Hi, can you hear me?
Indeed.
So I agree with everyone's point about unprecedented. The other one that I might suggest switching out for is the Zoom as a combining form, just because it wasn't successful in an earlier category and it's also connected to a specific corporation, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable, like free advertising. So, but I definitely think unprecedented should be on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. Nicole.
Yeah, I hate unprecedented more than absolutely everything else, because this is not unprecedented. It's not racial violence, political turmoil, pandemics. It's just not. Unprecedented is what provosts send when they want to be like, we know your shit's on fire, sorry about it, we can't say anything pathetic. It's not what represents 2020, right? I'm not going to argue for anything else in particular. I just don't like unprecedented.
Thanks, Nicole. Kelly, can I turn to you?
Yeah, I think
I'm actually going to make this a public statement. If you are nominating, just a reminder, if you're nominating from the floor, you need to also be able to make a case for something to remove. And so if you're just putting in the chat that you would like to nominate from the floor, I'm just going to dismiss it. Let me know what you want to take out. Go ahead, Kelly.
Okay, yeah, I agree that I absolutely dislike the usage of unprecedented, the way that it's used, but I do think that it's very indicative of words that have been used in 2020. The whole election was unprecedented. The fires were unprecedented. Murder hornets were unprecedented. People are using it in lots of different ways, and I do think that it should replace Zoom in this list because of the reason Chloe mentioned, that it has already not succeeded in its own category.
Thank you, Kelly. I would like to recognize Julie Sweetland. But can I recognize Julie Sweetland? There we go.
You have recognized Julie Sweetland. I would like to speak for 2020 simply because I think the other options will not stick well. We've already picked anti-racism as a year. We've picked before times as a year. Blur's Day and BIPOC couldn't even win their own categories. Pandemic, Merriam-Webster picked that. Zoom, I agree with the previous speaker that said that is a kind of a corporate ad. We already have a Zoom category, so we don't need to double down on that. 2020, I think, would let the science communication that comes out of this position the Dialect Society as attentive to all of the things that have happened this year that people are talking about, and also allow us to do some education on the meaning of a word and language in use as opposed to language as, kind of prescriptive and that sort of thing. So, and doom scrolling, while I love it as the digital word of the year, having spent a good part of my pandemic time in the rural Midwest where people just do not have access to internet, I feel like it's just a very coastal, kind of elite kind of word, and perfect for the digital word of the year, but not one I think we should elevate overall.
Thank you, Julie. Julius Boxer Cooper.
Yeah, thank you very much. And since this may very well be my last chance to speak, I'd like to say I'm very grateful to serve on this panel. Thank you very much for that opportunity. Sorry. Okay, that's it for the grandstanding. Now, so I was thinking I want to remove Blur's Day. As much as I love that word, I think it's unbelievably clever. It's just the fact that today is the first time I'm hearing it, I think, doesn't make it a great word for this list. I would like to nominate a word, and you're going to laugh, the word is bad. My reason is that, well, people have raised issues of, like, if a word is elitist or not, like doom scrolling. But what I find with bad is not does it fit, not only does it generally fit the year pretty well, I think, but also you know, it is statistically probable that the vast majority of us know someone or other who has died of the pandemic, which is very much kind of engulfed our lives. It's engulfed everything we've done. I think bad is pretty universal. I mean, yes, people may have had good individual years, but again, it is highly statistically probable, based on the number of deaths around the world, that almost everyone knows someone who's died. And there's an ultimate tragedy in that can really only be described like an overarching word like bad, at least in my mind. That is my submission.
Thank you, Julius.
Okay, so there's a lot of talk about why we have Zoom and Blur's Day on there. We can just cut both. We can add unprecedented. There's been enough calls for that. We're going to leave Zoom and Blur's Day on the cutting room floor. So unprecedented will be added and those two will be removed. It's 9:39 here on the East Coast. We're getting later and later. And I think that it would be great if we could move towards voting now before it gets too late. So we've got a lot of excellent discussion. Thank you all for all of your comments. But if Charles, if you'd like to make those changes, there we go. You now have 9 choices for Word of the Year. If you don't see unprecedented, you may need to scroll down to the very bottom. It may take a little scrolling, but it's there as the final choice. You can scroll down, it says Brian Submit. Okay, we are going to have a runoff. The top 2 vote getters are 2020 with 29%, 92 votes. In second place, COVID with 25%, 79 votes, beating out doom scrolling, social distancing, unprecedented. So we are now going to have a runoff between those 2, COVID and 2020, as your top 2 vote getters. Your last chance to make your opinion known in this forum. So use your vote wisely. It's a close one. Get those last votes in, your last chance to vote for Word of the Year. It's a tight race.
There's no recount.
There's no recount.
No litigation.
Scott Kiesling swiping in the chat with a plea for poggers at the last possible minute. No, Scott.
Too late. All right. Okay, we have 310 votes. Of those 310, 167 voted for COVID. That's 54% of the vote. 2020 gets 46%, 143 votes, which means that COVID is your American Dialect Society Word of the Year for 2020. Thank you all so much for sticking through, and I know this went way over schedule. Not surprising given, you know, the various obstacles and challenges we had in putting this all together, but I'm glad to say that it did happen relatively smoothly. I really appreciate everyone who was involved for making it run smoothly. The conversation was civil and illuminating, and I appreciate this. I can't tell you what we'll be doing a year from now, if we'll be in this type of Word of the Year again or not. That's a decision that we'll make later. But I'm glad that we can say that this has been a successful experiment in having our first virtual Word of the Year. So, unless there are any final things to say, I'm going to thank everyone who participated in the discussion and in the voting, and for nominating so many great words. There was a lot of great effort and thought put into that. And so thank you so much for taking part in this. If this is your first time for Word of the Year, we hope that we will see you.
Time doesn't care.
Either in person or virtually. Great.
Thanks everybody, and thanks to Ben and to Charles and to Grant and to Jesse for managing
Sanja,
this cat's
thank
crowd.
you for your comments as always, Sanja. You always bring your game.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to bring this to a close now. You can go to your various after parties, and we'll see you around.
Virtual wine and cheese.
Yeah, where's the hotel bar?
My wine is not virtual.